Hello, welcome to Cold Radio, where we explore mysterious cases and hidden truths. The JonBenét Ramsey case is still controversial. Over the years, many people have questioned and even believed that the Ramsey family was responsible for JonBenét's death. Today, Cold Radio will join you in reviewing 5 people who have strongly spoken out against them. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on interesting content. And if you have any theories about this case, leave a comment below. Now, let's get started. 1. Steve Thomas. An unusual investigator in the JonBenét Ramsey case, he was the rare person who stood up to the entire system, from the police, the prosecutors, to the media, all to protect his beliefs. As the lead investigator for the Boulder Police Department, he carefully analyzed every clue, digging into every detail in the hope of finding the truth. But in the end, all he got in return was disappointment, bitterness, and a truth that no one wanted to hear. The legal system he once trusted was manipulated, and JonBenét still hasn't gotten justice. In his book, JonBenét, Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, Steve Thomas exposes what he witnessed, an investigation full of concessions and compromises. He believes that from the beginning the police should have focused on the Ramsey family, especially Patsy Ramsey. Instead, they let the family take control of the game, turning everything into a perfect drama, where John and Patsy Ramsey were no longer suspects but pitiful victims in the eyes of the public. According to Thomas's theory, something terrible happened inside the Ramsey house on the night of December 25, 1996. Patsy Ramsey, possibly angry that JonBenét had wet the bed again, lost control and hit her daughter hard on the head. The autopsy revealed that JonBenét suffered severe head trauma before she was strangled. This led Thomas to believe that her death was not a premeditated murder from outside, but the result of a serious accident that the family tried to cover up. In her panic, Patsy had staged a fake crime scene, a ransom note that was more than 2 pages long, an absurdity for a kidnapper, a mysterious murder, but one that bore the hallmarks of a mother trying to right a wrong. JonBenét's body was placed in the basement, wrapped in her favorite blanket, with a rope around her neck, as a declaration that this was a murder. But was it really true? Thomas was not only disappointed with the way the case was handled, he was outraged. Why was the family whose daughter had been murdered treated as if they had power? Why could they hire the best lawyers, refuse to cooperate with the police for months without being forced? And instead of sitting in an interrogation room, they appeared on television, telling their side of the story? The FBI and other investigators had all too easily dismissed the possibility that the Ramseys had staged the case. Without the influence of politics, media, and the forces behind it, would the truth have been revealed long ago? But speaking the truth is never easy, and Steve Thomas paid a heavy price. He was criticized, isolated, and branded a traitor for standing up to the system. But he has no regrets. In an interview, Thomas bitterly said, "We had a chance to bring justice to JonBenét, but the system failed. I cannot work in an environment where justice is compromised." In 1998, Steve Thomas made the difficult decision to resign. He could no longer work in a system he no longer believed in. 2. Fleet White. A close friend of the Ramsey family, not only was he an important witness but also became their strongest opponent. If Steve Thomas was the first person to dare to speak up from the police, Fleet White was the one involved, witnessing the scene with his own eyes and gradually becoming suspicious of those who used to be his close friends. On the morning of December 26, 1996, Fleet White was present at the Ramsey house with the purpose of supporting the family while the police were investigating the kidnapping of JonBenét. But just a few minutes later, he entered a nightmare that he could not escape for the rest of his life. John Ramsey, seemingly unable to bear it any longer, decided to go down to the basement to find his daughter. Fleet White followed, and then everything changed forever. JonBenét lay there, a white blanket wrapped around her small body, her eyes closed, a rope around her neck, the cold cement floor. A suffocating scene. But what shook Fleet White the most wasn't finding JonBenét's body, but how John Ramsey reacted immediately afterward. Instead of leaving the scene intact and immediately calling the police, John Ramsey picked up his daughter's body and ran upstairs, inadvertently destroying any evidence that might have been left on her body. At that moment, Fleet White knew something was wrong. A kidnapping never ends with the victim's body still in the house. And would a father, if he was truly shocked and heartbroken, actually do that? Or was he trying to hide something? Fleet White initially trusted the Ramseys completely. He stood by them, protected them, comforted them, but as time went on, strange things began to happen. John and Patsy refused to cooperate with the police. Why? If their daughter had really been murdered by a stranger, shouldn't they do everything they could to help find him? The ransom note. What kidnapper would have time to sit and write a 3-page letter in the victim's home? The way John Ramsey handled the body, when the police arrived, he didn't panic. He seemed to know what was coming. Those doubts weren't just fleeting, they grew, until Fleet White couldn't keep quiet any longer. Fleet White was not the type to let anything unusual slide. He asked Boulder police to take the Ramseys more seriously, but all he got in return was resistance and silence. When John and Patsy appeared on television, telling the story of an intruder who had murdered their daughter, Fleet White could stand it no longer. He publicly expressed his skepticism and sent a letter to the Colorado Attorney General, demanding that the investigation be reopened with the Ramseys as the prime suspects. But instead of getting answers, he was pushed out of the Ramseys' inner circle. People who had once considered him a friend turned away, avoided him, and even saw him as an enemy. Fleet White was now fighting not just the truth, but an entire system that was willing to silence anyone who asked the wrong questions. To many, Fleet White was just a witness who happened to be there. But they didn't expect he wouldn't stop there. He appeared in the press, in interviews, criticizing the Boulder police for letting the Ramseys control the investigation. He also publicly accused the authorities of compromising to protect the Ramsey family rather than finding the real killer. Fleet White once said, "I saw the crime scene with my own eyes and I couldn't ignore the irregularities. I just wanted to know the truth, but no one seemed to want that." His determination made him a target of attacks. There were rumors that he was threatened, isolated, and even pressured to keep quiet. But Fleet White refused to back down. He believed that JonBenét was not killed by a stranger, but by something that happened in her own home. 3. Linda Hoffman-Pugh was no outsider. She was the Ramseys' housekeeper, present in the house every day, witnessing the routines, the stresses, and the petty conflicts between the family members. She knew better than anyone what was really behind their perfect facade. Patsy Ramsey often confided in Linda about her worries about maintaining the image of the model family. She could not hide the stress of having to make sure everything was perfect, from the house, to the parties, to JonBenét's appearance in beauty pageants. Linda also knew an important fact. JonBenét often wet the bed at night. This may seem trivial, but to Patsy Ramsey, it was a source of frustration. Linda noticed that Patsy was sometimes irritable and out of control, especially when things did not go her way. At first glance, these details did not seem alarming, but put them in the context of a stressful Christmas Eve, when all the pressure was on an already exhausted mother. The story might be different. Linda Hoffman-Pugh was not at the Ramsey home on Christmas Eve 1996, but based on what she knew, she believed something had happened that night. In the days leading up to Christmas, Patsy had been exhausted. The parties, events, and pressures of JonBenét's pageants seemed to have drained her. And then, on the morning of December 26, 1996, when Linda received the news that JonBenét had died, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. She didn't believe in the intruder theory. Patsy had a habit of locking her doors very carefully at night. If someone had been in the house, there would have been more evidence. There was no sign of forced entry. A normal kidnapping would never end with the victim's body still in the house. And, most importantly, why would a kidnapper bother to write a 3-page ransom note at the scene? These suspicions could not be ignored, and when Linda was called to testify before the grand jury, she spilled the beans. When Linda Hoffman-Pugh faced the jury, she held nothing back. She pointed out 3 things that made her believe Patsy had something to do with JonBenét's death. First, the way Patsy called 911 was suspicious. Her tone did not sound like that of a truly distraught mother. After the call ended, a missed recording accidentally picked up the voice of someone in the house. This led many to believe that someone was staging the whole thing. Second, the ransom note was implausible. It didn't look like a kidnapper's letter. A stranger wouldn't have any reason to write such a long letter in the victim's home. The wording in the letter was very similar to how Patsy spoke on a daily basis. Third, Patsy's behavior after the murder was very suspicious. She refused to cooperate with the police and immediately hired a lawyer. In interviews, she avoided important questions about the night of the murder. Linda believed that JonBenét may have died in an accident, not a premeditated murder. She believed that Patsy may have lost control, hit her daughter in a fit of rage, and when she realized what had happened, she panicked and staged a fake crime scene to cover it all up. Linda's testimony fits perfectly with the theories of Steve Thomas and Fleet White, who also believed this was a covered-up accident. Immediately after Linda spoke out, the Ramseys immediately denied all allegations. John Ramsey claimed that Linda was just a maid who could not possibly know everything that happened in their home. The Ramseys accused her of having a grudge against Patsy, that they had a history of conflict, and that she was just looking for media attention. But despite criticism from many quarters, Linda did not change her stance. She insisted that what she said was not speculation, but what she knew. Although Linda's testimony has been controversial, it cannot be denied that she raised questions that cannot be ignored. Why did the Ramseys refuse to cooperate with the police in the first place? If Patsy was innocent, why did the ransom note resemble the way she wrote it? Was JonBenét really murdered by a stranger, or was her death the result of something that happened within her own family? To this day, Linda Hoffman-Pugh remains one of the Ramseys' most outspoken critics. If you find this story increasingly intriguing and confusing, don't forget to like it to support Cold Radio in continuing to explore mysterious cases like this. And if you have your own theories, leave a comment below. Who knows, your perspective might just open up a new direction for this case. 4. Chris Wolfe. He was an investigative journalist, and like many other reporters, when the JonBenét Ramsey case became the focus of the media, he was naturally drawn into it. But instead of simply reporting the story like his colleagues, Chris Wolfe was considered one of the most likely suspects by the Ramsey family. In their book, The Death of Innocence, John and Patsy Ramsey hinted that Chris Wolfe might be the killer. They claimed that Boulder police had investigated Wolfe for suspicious behavior around the time of the murder. These suspicions did not come out of nowhere. Chris Wolfe's girlfriend, JonBenét, told police that on the morning of December 26, 1996, when JonBenét's body was found, Wolfe acted strangely. He seemed angry, out of control, and even said, "The police will never find the real killer." Wolfe had also worked near the Ramseys, and some of his statements were too much for the police to ignore. These details were enough to put him on the suspect list. But there was one big problem. There was no evidence linking Chris Wolfe to the case. The police investigated him, but after a while they had to admit that there was no basis for charging Wolfe. He was removed from the list of suspects. But that didn't stop the Ramseys from continuing to include him in their book as one of the suspects. Chris Wolfe was not the type to let others smear him. He knew he was innocent, and he believed that the Ramseys had named him as a suspect to throw the investigation off track. So instead of staying silent, Chris Wolfe sued John and Patsy Ramsey for defamation. The lawsuit quickly gained attention, and it revealed many suspicious details. Chris Wolfe claimed that Patsy Ramsey had killed JonBenét. He accused the Ramseys of deliberately defaming him to distract the public from the real suspicions directed at them. He believed that the police had overlooked the most important suspect, the Ramseys themselves. But despite the high profile of the lawsuit, the court dismissed the case in 2002. The reason? Under U.S. law, the Ramseys had the right to publicly state their opinions about a suspect, as long as they were based on investigative information. Their mention of Chris Wolfe in the book was not enough to constitute defamation. Chris Wolfe did not win the case, but that doesn't mean he's giving up. Although the police have officially cleared Chris Wolfe of any suspects, his lawsuit has forced the public to look at the case from a different perspective. If Chris Wolfe was truly innocent, why did the Ramseys name him? Did the police miss something during the investigation? And most importantly, why was Chris Wolfe so convinced that Patsy Ramsey was the killer? In subsequent interviews, Wolfe has highlighted several controversial points. The ransom note was a fake. Patsy Ramsey may have written it. JonBenét was not killed by a stranger. She died of domestic abuse or an accident. The Ramseys staged the crime scene and pointed the finger at other suspects to protect themselves. These arguments aren't new, but when highlighted by someone who was unjustly dragged into the case, they become even more thought-provoking. 5. Donald Foster, the man who decodes the mysteries of language. Donald Foster is not a detective, nor is he a forensic scientist. He is a professor of literature at Vassar College, a leading expert in the field of linguistic analysis, who has helped solve difficult cases by deciphering the author's writing style and choice of words. He is not only a researcher but also a person who has the ability to reveal the truth through words and writing. In his career, Foster has made some amazing breakthroughs. He identified the true author of A Funeral Elegy, which was mistakenly attributed to William Shakespeare. He helped the FBI track down the author of the series of threatening letters in the Unabomber case. He has helped solve many criminal cases, using analysis of tone, writing style, and word choice to find the identity of the anonymous person. And then, he got access to the ransom note in the JonBenét Ramsey case, a letter that is considered the key to finding the truth. Foster looked at it and immediately realized that this was no ordinary blackmail note. He saw it as a linguistic puzzle, and if he could decipher it, he might be able to find the writer and uncover the truth about JonBenét's death. Donald Foster noticed several things that were off-putting when he first read the letter. First, the length was unusual, 3 pages. A real kidnapper would not have bothered to write such a long letter on the spot. Most ransom notes in history consisted of just a few short sentences, stating the ransom demand and instructions for the exchange. There was no reason for a stranger to sit down and spend dozens of minutes writing a detailed letter in the victim's home. Second, the writing style was more acting than realistic. The letter contained many dramatic phrases, more like they came from a movie than from a real criminal. The opening line, "Listen carefully," was reminiscent of the movie Speed, 1994. This suggests that the writer may have been trying to imitate the writing style of a kidnapper rather than actually being a kidnapper. Some of the letter's sentences seemed too dramatic, as if it were written to scare rather than to be a real threat. Third, the style was too similar to Patsy Ramsey's. Foster studied Patsy Ramsey's handwriting samples and personal correspondence. The result? He found that the word choice, sentence structure, and emphasis in the letter were similar to Patsy's writing. Some of the words and phrases in the letter matched exactly what Patsy had used in previous letters. Fourth, the $118,000 figure, an incredible coincidence. The amount requested in the letter was $118,000. No coincidence. This was the exact amount of John Ramsey's year-end bonus. A stranger could not have known the exact amount, but a family member could. Remarkably, Donald Foster did not initially suspect Patsy Ramsey. When he first approached the case, Foster believed that the Ramseys were innocent and that someone else had killed JonBenét. He began his research with the goal of proving that the letter had been written by an intruder. But the more he analyzed it, the more he found similarities with Patsy's writing style. This change of heart not only surprised Foster, but also made him one of the most vocal accusers of the Ramseys. Of course, John and Patsy Ramsey completely rejected Foster's claims. They insisted that Patsy did not write the letter. They argued that Foster had been wrong in his analysis. They accused Foster of seeking fame from the case rather than genuinely caring about justice. They insisted that the DNA found on JonBenét's body did not match any family members, so they could not have been the culprits. Patsy Ramsey even stated, "I did not write the letter. There is no evidence to support that." But the important thing is, no one can deny the evidence Foster presented. Foster's analysis made the public even more suspicious of the Ramsey family, especially about Patsy's role in the case. If Patsy did not write the letter, why did the tone of the letter match hers? If this was a real kidnapping, why was the ransom exactly John Ramsey's year-end bonus? If this was an intruder, why were there no obvious signs of forced entry? Donald Foster was not an investigator, not a police officer. He simply used writing and language to find the truth. And what was that truth? If the ransom note was fake, then the whole case could have been a staged drama. But who wrote the letter? And most importantly, who was really responsible for JonBenét's death? That question, to this day, remains unanswered. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Cold Radio so you don't miss out on future mystery stories. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.